Hey, welcome to Just Salvos Live. Today we're once again talking to Tim Costello about an incredibly important issue to all Australians.
Absolutely. We're talking about Indigenous Australians. We need to know exactly what we need to do to embrace our brothers and sisters.
Yep.
And he's a great guy who has experience but also a great love in his heart to be able to talk to us about this issue.
And that certainly comes through his actual deep passion to see equality in Indigenous affairs.
Absolutely.
It's an amazing interview. Here we go. Tim Costello on Just Salvos Live. Tim Costello, thanks so much for joining us again, becoming a bit of a regular on Just Salvos Live.
Look, I live for this. Yeah, good.
We'd love you just to start by talking to us about the state of the nation when it comes to Indigenous Australia.
Yeah, most Australians are shocked that there are third world conditions in Indigenous Australia. They're particularly thinking of remote communities. It's worth remembering that 80% of Indigenous live actually in regional and urban areas, but in remote communities we know that there's a 20-year difference in the lifespan of Indigenous compared to white Australians. We know that child mortality rates are ridiculously high, so this is really our soul that's hemorrhaging with a sense of powerlessness and guilt, and what it means to really be Australian, coming to terms with really the oldest continuing culture on earth, 40,000 years. I've just come back from New Zealand, and Maori are very strong there, but best estimates are Maori arrived in New Zealand in 1350, so only about 300-400 years before whites. Our Indigenous have been here 40,000 years.
And we must start to appreciate that culture and that heritage, or else we were never going to get anywhere. But what we have started to surely make an impact. I know there are certain policies that come out that try to, close the gap and so on. Things like the intervention. Are these things working? Are we heading in the right direction?
Well, we have bad news really only overnight. So a wonderful campaign called Close the Gap. Close the gap in the age expectancy of Indigenous, the levels of diabetes and infant mortality. And we set really good goals to close the gap. The first report after 3 years says we're already off track. So this is really depressing. The view that I have is that we've actually just swung wildly from, initially it was, this is an empty continent, and so we don't even need a treaty. In New Zealand, they were settled by treaty with Maoris, the Treaty of Waitangi. We just said Indigenous are invisible.
Don't exist.
They're not here, terra nullius. We then went through a policy of assimilation where you've really got to become like us or die out. We then said, and it was the right policy, self-determination. We want you to have your land and to run your own lives. But self-determination actually became cut and run. So we hand over the lands to you and we just leave. Now, what European town can run without police force and run without all the security forces and services, that's what happened. We now have swung back from self-determination to intervention, your words, saying this is so shocking, send in the military. And the military have gone into the Northern Territory, and whilst there are some things that have been good, far more communities that have banned alcohol and quarantining of welfare checks, so you've got to spend it on your kids, not on drink or gambling or other things. We know this is not sustainable. You can't send the military in and sustain a solution. So my view is we actually have to move to a development model. A development model which actually says it is long term, it is you being empowered, it is your aspirations to live at a level that other Australians do. But that's now a model I think we have to adopt.
And what does that model look like? How do we actually implement that from a local level? What do we have to do to support that? How does it work?
Well, for a start, it means you don't have the ridiculous bureaucracy. So in one area where World Vision was working, invited in by the community, 350 Indigenous people, this is northwest Western Australia, 52 different service agencies working 350 people. And you had fly-in, fly-out bureaucrats at for all the different state departments, housing and health, and then the different federal departments. And surprise, surprise, Indigenous, when they hear a plane coming or a four-wheel drive, just go fishing. They just go hunting. They don't act, they're sick of being consulted. It's so confusing. A development model really has at its centre one word, relationship. Relationship that says, because we come and stay, we respect your culture, want to empower you, but we also, because we have relationship, are robust enough to say hard things, to say, you know, you do have to go to school. And this domestic violence or drinking has to stop. That comes out of relationship, not fly-in, fly-out bureaucrats and lots of replicated services. That is a development model to actually build long-term relationship and simplify.
And who is it that should be having that relationship? Do we want the government to bring in social workers? Do we want agencies like World Vision or the Salvation Army to be in the communities? Are we looking to peers to sort of guide that process through?
Certainly it has to be agreed who is the primary relationship there, the one-stop shop. And government will always have an important role because Indigenous are Australian citizens. We have international human rights treaties saying, you know, the right to access and education and health. But essentially government can meet those rights through, and it can be a world vision. And we're being invited into a few Indigenous communities to do just this, a development model. It can be other bodies where you simplify all the complexity of who's in here and who's consulting. So that's incredibly important in terms of staying and learning the language and understanding that when Indigenous have a worldview that is very different to ours, particularly in remote communities. Many Indigenous in remote communities do not believe in bacteria. They don't believe in germs. They actually see why you get sick in totally different terms. When it's explained to them because there's relationship of the link between not washing your hands and sickness and a range of those things, they're more than capable to actually take control. But the complexity of so many people coming in and out and just assuming you understand, I think is part of the problem.
And I'm thinking that relationship, that mutual respect can only happen with reconciliation. And we hear that word thrown around a lot. What does it mean? What does it mean to be reconciled together? When clearly it doesn't mean just an acceptance of everything that you do and an acceptance of everything that I do. What does it mean? Yeah,
reconciliation is recognising that as Kevin Rudd did when he was Prime Minister, we really stuffed up. Paul Keating did it earlier. We brought the alcohol. We brought the diseases. We took your land. So it's recognising we have had a huge impact. But then it's not stopping there and saying, so Indigenous are left with a victimhood and they play out victim. They actually have capacity. As long as we also, in relationship, accept their aspirations. So it is interesting for me that in Africa, if World Vision opens a school, you know, parents will walk 30k to get their kid into school. Aspiration isn't the same often in Indigenous communities where there is a school and parents don't tell the kids to get up and go to the school, which is 100 metres away. So what does their aspiration mean? What does it mean for them to choose a good life as they name it? We actually have to have a reconciling view that that won't just be because we have this need, our way, our world. What are their aspirations? How do they take control of that?
You mentioned Kevin Rudd, and obviously the apology was a big moment for the whole nation. There aren't many people who wouldn't have watched that. I'm interested to know, why was it only an apology to the stolen generations and not for all the other atrocities we know of? And what have we seen happen since then?
Yeah, every continent that's been settled on Earth has had a similar history. And to maybe apologise in this generation for views of colonialism and imperialism that, you know, existed 1,000 years ago, starts to get into tricky political landscape. But the apology to the stolen generation really was based on the fact that we knew. We actually knew that we were being culpable in terms of breaking up families. We had a view, and these are documents from the 1937 Commonwealth Conference when Indigenous state ministers got together, which said, let's breed out the colour. Full bloods, they said, they're tribal, they're going to die out. We could have 1 million half-castes in this nation, so it was a plan to actually say we can assimilate them, remove those half-castes from their mothers. We knew by our own standards that was inhuman. That's really what the apology was about.
Okay. I don't want to go off topic too much here, but for a Christian, surely we understand the concept of being able to say sorry for something that we didn't necessarily have a direct line of contact with. I'm thinking Jesus stepping in.
Sort of did that. Yeah.
Stepping in, sinless person, reconciling for us between, so for Christians to not understand this idea of concept of apology and reconciliation, sometimes frustrating for me, but that's just my little thing. Anyway.
That's off your chest.
That's off my chest. I want to talk to you about the talk of the referendum to include Indigenous people into the Constitution. Good thing or bad thing?
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing. Let's be clear that you don't want to set up impossible expectations. It's not a magic bullet. It's not going to close the gap overnight. Just as when we had Mabo and Wick cases that gave Indigenous rights to land, which I totally support, it was only ever going to benefit about 5% of Indigenous. Most actually would never and could never have a claim back to original land. So much has happened since. The preamble and the recognition of Indigenous is really symbolically important in terms of reconciliation, but it's not going to change a whole lot of things overnight. But we need, as a nation, to say, these were the first peoples. They weren't settled by treaty as New Zealand was, and they should have been. And in our constitution, we are now recognising those really bad mistakes, and we're seeking to address them now.
Do you think we're going to get there? Do you think the referendum will get us a positive result?
I think so. I mean, I think the discussion really is between Indigenous, between those who want something stronger, treaty rights, and those who are accepting something symbolic. And that discussion's going on. I'm hopeful that once they've agreed on what the form should be, the rest of Australia who are shocked by third world conditions will say, count me in, I'm voting for that.
Once again, it's been a real privilege. We've fit a lot into a small amount of time. Thank you so much.
A pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks.
Once again, another very powerful interview with Tim Costello. His absolute compassion for Indigenous is so obvious and probably should be something that we can all take from.
I definitely agree. We all need to embrace Indigenous people, Indigenous culture. Let's learn something about our Indigenous brothers and sisters, even if we don't know any. So I think we should start hitting the history books and making ourselves aware of these issues, but also of culture and heritage. It's great stuff.
They are you, they are me. It's an issue that I'm sure we'll be talking about on our Facebook page, facebook.com/JUSTSalvos. Please come back again. We look forward to talking more social justice with you next week on Just Salvos Live.